I'd like to respond to a question from my community, hi Ronnie, who asked about the pain of being abandoned by friends and relationships during awakening and how to deal with that. I'd like to say that it's very normal during awakening and Kundalini process for relationships to end, to lose people, and sometimes some of those people are really precious. And there are a number of reasons that we lose and people fall away from our lives during awakening process. The first one is just that the relationship naturally comes to an end. There's something about your shift into awakening that seems to signal a completion of that relationship, and you can feel and sense that, and that's just a natural completion and happens in many different times and phases in our lives, particularly around change. And so it's natural that completion is going to happen when we deepen or begin awakening journeys. The second kind of end of relationship is when you suddenly go into Kundalini or deepening Kundalini, and you often have a very significant change in interests, hobbies, energy for the external world. People's attention gets pulled deeply into an intelligent, sensory, intuitive awareness of awakening and their inner life, and that tends to pull you out of the external world. There can be a falling away of shared interests and shared values and connections and shared activities you've had with friends and communities in your life, and suddenly you no longer want to do those things, or you find that because of increased sensitivity or internal changes, those things are no longer possible for you. Maybe you went with your friends on a Sunday afternoon and you watched the football at the pub and you had a beer and you laughed and it was so great to be in that community, and suddenly you're in an awakening process where going into that kind of environment feels impossible to overwhelming, and you can't share those experiences. You may find that you go through that sort of deep and intensely sensitizing purification phase of Kundalini, and you come out the other side and you can return to some of those activities and you can return to some communities. And then others will simply fall away and disappear out of your life because you're on a new path. The third kind of way of losing relationships is actually people reject you, right? People reject you for being on this path. You no longer speak about things in the same way. Suddenly you're interested in vegan food and you're reading books and watching teachers on the internet, and you just want to talk about your inner life, or you just want to share stories about awakening, your awakening, or listen to other people's and meet people at that level, and you find yourself rejected in your everyday familiar relationships, family systems, and even in partnerships. This can be very painful. Sometimes you'll also find that as you deepen into awakening and you develop that acute awareness of what's right and wrong, that's part of navigating awakening, you suddenly recognize there are certain systems or relationships, people or groups that are just not good for you. And you either find yourself in conflict with them, or they're in conflict with you, or you find yourself withdrawing from them. So these are some of the ways that you can find that relationships fall away during awakening. One of the things that also happens is that if you're in relationships that are really a long way off purpose for you, a long way off path, a long way away from what the path of awakening is calling you to do, you will find that the awakening has a stronger power. No matter how strong you are, at some point awakening has a stronger power, and it will pull you into alignment with it. And as it does that, it will pull you out of relationships or with that are misaligned with your path, that are unnourishing or unsupportive or distracting in a way that maybe is sometimes damaging. You will also find that sometimes people will find your beautiful energy intolerable, right? Like it's painful for them. As you awaken, your energy is a source of purifying for you, and it can also be purifying for people around you sometimes. You can also manage that. That's another discussion. But your energy can be activating and purifying or stimulating for people. And if they're not wanting to be conscious, or their stuff comes up around you, or their stuff comes up around you very fast, they may not want to hang out with you nor understand what's going on. And that can also be impactful for awakening. The other thing that goes on with awakening is you often do very deep assessment of your personal history and your life. There can be quite a strong evaluation of your relationship life, your family life, your childhood, your adulthood, and current relationships. And as you become more conscious, as you process trauma and become more aware of things, blindfolds fall off, the rose-colored glasses dissolve, and suddenly you see, wow, I've been putting up with some really toxic behavior from my best friend, or wow, that mate of mine, that way he speaks to me, it's actually judgmental and it reminds me of my dad. So suddenly we become acutely aware of our conditioned tolerance to mistreatment, to judgment and criticism, and sometimes we become acutely aware of our conditioning and training to accept different kinds of subtle to avert abuse. And this is important, right? We're here to honor ourselves and love ourselves and create a beautiful, safe, nurturing life for ourselves in our awakening. And so those blinkers falling off is very important, and it's also very painful. And sometimes that can happen inside a marriage, inside a business partnership, inside a work relationship with a colleague or a boss, and they're not easy to navigate. That takes some time sometimes to see whether that can be changed and repaired, whether both parties can grow, or if you actually need to exit the situation. So it's very common as you start to go into the awakening journey to find people, relationships, communities, groups, workplaces dropping away. And you can feel abandoned. You may be abandoned by those people, and it can be painful. There can be times of grief and sadness and loss, and a kind of reconciliation that you go through, that this path is going to ask you to be of deep integrity in your relationship life, and that you don't have any choice. And you will find as you go further and further into your awakening that the level of integrity and impeccability that you're asked to live from in your awakening life never ends in terms of it increasing. You are going to be asked to have more and more and more and more integrity, more and more and more and more impeccability, because the consciousness that you hold has to be respected at higher and higher levels of integrity, and that includes your relationships. And some relationships can sustain that and some can't. So if you're watching this video and you've experienced different kinds of losses, I hear you and I feel you. When I reflect on my own life, there is this phase of when my Kundalini really increased from just bubbling in the background to becoming very active, where there was a sudden disappearing of a lot of people and groups out of my life. And I look back at that period of my life, and I also see that coming in from the fringes and gradually centralizing my life was a whole lot of new friends. And those friends that came into my life at this point in time, almost all of them are my nearest and dearest soul friends today. And we've been friends for decades. There's a small number of friends that were prior to this shift in my life that maintained through, because they were already integrous to who I was and what I was becoming, or they were aligned with awakening and going through their own sort of yogic journey. And that includes a lot of my sort of soul friends from my ashram days. We were already on that journey together. But everything else and everyone else that wasn't aligned disappeared. Some of those endings were painful. Some of them were surprising. Some of them were shocking. Some were rejecting. All of the things that you may have experienced as well. And this is natural. At some point in time, new people and new opportunities will come into your life to fill those spaces that are in alignment. But you can go through a period of time where you feel very isolated and very alone. And this is also a significant and important part of the journey. And I'm going to speak about that in another video. If you find yourself in this experience, people dropping away, a significant partnership is ending or feels out of alignment, or you can't participate for a period of time in friendship groups and activities, it's okay. There's nothing wrong with you. This is an absolutely normal part of the awakening journey. Sometimes we can feel very scared when this starts happening in our life. We've invested a lot of time and a lot of energy maybe in curating these friendships and building these communities, and they're important to us, they've been valuable to us, and suddenly either we can't sustain them because of the rigors of awakening, or they're not aligned for us, or people wander off. It's important at this time to be very loving and very kind to yourself, and to bring in a kind of acceptance. This is a phase. This is not forever. This is not the rest of your life. This is often most common in the intense purification at the beginning of awakening. During that phase, when there's a massive up-leveling and purification, a huge pulling inward, that is when you tend to lose a lot. And that's particularly in the first 6 months to a couple of years, you can have a lot of loss. Then it tends to stabilize and you can gain more consistency, and new people will begin to come into your life. I'll talk about that and other elements of aloneness and isolation in other videos. I see you, I feel you, I've been there too, and you will come out the other side with more love to give and an incredible capacity to receive love from life, the universe, and the new people that show up and love you exactly as you are, as a precious awakening being.